Hey, what up, guys? Welcome to another MonoRed Monday episode. And today I have a couple of topics to talk about. I went to a RCQ and a modern or a locals on Monday this week, and a couple of thoughts about a couple of changes I want to try out in my deck, and see how that goes. Let's kind of jump into it. So let's first talk about the RCQ. I went to one on Saturday, um, and I think it had like 50 something players, 55 or something like that, maybe 60 players. How did I do? Honestly, I didn't do too great. Namely, I think I misplayed a lot, and I guessing I wasn't really prepared for certain matchups as much. I was prepared for some of the top matchups, like your Cascade decks, Murktide, Death Shadow, some four-color decks, four-color on math, some of them. But there are certain decks in I guess tier two, tier three, where I wasn't very well prepared for it, or I just didn't play too well against them. So that kind of took me out of the RCQ kind of early. But it was a learning experience, definitely, and definitely something I need to practice more. While I have like a pretty good understanding about uh, like the upper part, like the tier one decks, I don't really have a huge understanding of some of the lower, I guess, rogue decks, tier two, tier three sort of decks. Um, I played some games with them, and I kind of have an idea of how they work, but in the end, I felt my knowledge was lacking, and that was kind of what didn't go well for me at the RCQ. So preparation was something I could have done more of. Now, definitely, I think to better prepare myself, I could have done more like Magic online, or something like that, where I would have had more exposure to um, the meta, or at least what people are playing. But unfortunately, I don't really have access to MTGO, so kind of just went in blind and kind of got wrecked. I'll be real honest there. So what happened to RCQ here? I played. It was supposed to be 6 rounds. I ended up just dropping out early because I lost the first 3 rounds. So how did it go? Game one, I was against four-color Urian with the Fail Guardian combo, and that unfortunately, um, I don't want to say it's unlucky or anything. I didn't go first in any of my games, or starting the matches. I think if I had a hand that was pretty good going first, but going second kind of hampered. Playing from behind kind of sucked. So, but either way, I guess going game one, I just didn't see the fell combo um, early enough. I guess I was able to play around it, counter it, and get rid of it, and all that stuff. But in the end, like I couldn't deal with the Vivian that was on the board. That was just kind of generating some advantage and making rhinos and stuff like that. So that's what I couldn't deal with. I dealt with the combo. I dealt with like, you know, his other board state of like all math and all that. But I just couldn't deal with the 6-man Vivian. There was just really no way for me to kind of easily remove her, while also having to deal with his like counter spells and stuff like that. So, game one I lost. Game two I went first. Um, it was going okay, but what I wasn't expecting that he had a lot of was fluster storms and stuff like that. I was expecting like maybe a spell pierce or mystical dispute, but for some reason he had a bunch of fluster storms in there. Either way, he was eventually able to resolve like a red and six and um, Teferi on the board, and I just couldn't deal with that after a while. Like it was a close matchup. Still, though, I just couldn't deal with both having to try to remove the Ren and Teferi at the same time. I was able to get rid of like Omnaths, Solitudes, and all of his other stuff. He was also playing Leyline Binding, which kind of sucked for me too, because I didn't really have an answer to Leyline Binding other than Fairy bouncing the Binding. But then he just recasts it for for 1 mana, so that didn't quite solve my issues with dealing with Leyline Binding. So that's my first time kind of playing against Leyline Binding, and um, it definitely was an eye opener into like um, types of removal I need to start running to kind of counter Leyline in some sense. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, about some changes I might make in the deck, or I might just do it after this kind of RCQ um, update thing. But anyways, so Leyline Binding kind of caught me off guard. It kind of put me in a weird spot. I didn't have any permanent ways to remove it. I was able to like to flicker their binding. I was stuff like that. But unfortunately, um, his it was more efficient than I could deal with. Like I couldn't remove it with Prismatic Ending. Couldn't really remove it with any other sort of removal in my deck. I think maybe if I could play like 5 minutes of Fairy, I could remove it. But yeah, I had no other ways of removing that type of enchantment. So yeah, the only other way I would be able to remove it is with like March, but I didn't want to pay 7 mana into March to remove it. So that's what kind of got me there. So that was game one. Game two, I went against Urza Infinity, and yeah, he just pumped out a bunch of Urza tokens, I guess, which was what was hard to deal with. The constructs and just kind of dumping his hand, and that was like that for the games that we played. He just dumped his hand, or if he didn't have a hand, he just played Urza sagas and just made a bunch of tokens, constructs, and kind of just overran me with that. And so another learning experience is I don't have enough removal to keep continually try to remove like 1-for-1s, because one for one removal is great, but if they have like a Urza Saga, which they can pump like three permanents onto the board, like 2 construct plus whatever they search for with the saga. It kind of becomes a bit of a chore to kind of deal with like 3 different permanents, where I might just have like only like 1 or 2 prismatic endings, and I'll be down cards while they're going to be up cards, and having to also deal with like maybe a potential counter spell, or mine the 7 mana Mind Sculptor, that's Mind Sensor, something. The thing that has Infinity, that they drop and they draw 2 cards. Totally forgot what the card name was, but yeah, they were able to out just resource me, and just have like a bunch of threats on the board. Yes, one way to deal with it is like with verdicts and stuff like that, but verdict, damn, could only deal with so much, and they could just bring it back. They could just dump out Mem Knights and Copters, and then put like more Urzas on the board. Yeah, couldn't deal with that, and then end up losing game 2, or match 2. And then game 3 was against Asmodan Foods, and pretty much kind of like the same story, honestly. It's Urza tokens, a bunch of Urza tokens, a bunch of like cat oven shenanigans, and food tokens, and the cookbooks, Asmodan herself, and yeah, it's just a bunch of like people going wide with a bunch of permanents that I just didn't have enough removal for, and essentially that's how they kind of just overran me with that. Just the cat oven was kind of hard to deal with. I could deal with the ovens, but the cats were still like there, and yeah, just the bunch of Urza tokens too, and they got really big because he had a bunch of food tokens off of like Lagoose, off of the cookbooks and stuff, and yeah, that was just kind of hard to deal with. So now I knew that coming in, that um, my past experience playing against artifact decks were kind of miserable. Um, I would say it's probably one of my worst matchup, along with like four color Urian. Four color Urian though, I've had a 50-50 win rate. Sometimes I do really well against them. Sometimes I do kind of terrible. It's kind of been so. It's just, honestly, just who can establish like Teferis and stuff on the board first, and can't remove the other person's Teferi. That kind of that's the matchup for four colors, at least for in my experience. So I'm not so worried about losing to four color as I am worried about losing to the artifact decks. So I'm trying to find new ways to kind of deal with artifacts. Um, thoughts I had were like I could play ED, which is Engineer Explosives. I could play Fracturing Gus, which I used to play in my deck, but at my current locals, there's no real artifact players. There's no Hammer Time as there's been a few Hammer Times, but they're kind of for me a lot easier to deal with. I can deal with Hammer Time. I can't really deal with Affinity as well because Hammer Time I can kind of deal with their creatures that are attacking with and stuff like that. Where like uh, Affinity they just go super wide and that's just kind of hard to deal with. Unless I have a Supreme Verdict in hand every single turn, I'm not gonna be able to keep pace with them. So, and Supreme Verdict doesn't deal with their other enchantments or their other artifacts like Spring Leaf, and you have like Shadow Spear, Relic of Progenesis. They have like other artifacts that I need to also deal with, artifact permanents, and so you know, Factoring Gus was one way to deal with it. Cleansing Nova, but those are 5 mana cards. They're kind of expensive, a little too hard to play. Um, I'm playing currently 3 board wipes already, so I don't think there's any good 4 mana wipes that can deal with artifacts efficiently as well. There's a one blue card where it returns all artifacts on the board to the hand, which is handy, but they can still kind of barf out their hand. Like I don't want to return like a mind sensor thingy, and allow them to draw 2 again. And if they have Urza on the board, it doesn't really fix anything because they can just play their artifacts and then just tap it for mana with Urza. So I didn't like the blue card because the blue card is basically a Cyclonic Rift for artifacts. I forgot the name of it. And so right now, I want to test the idea out of sideboarding in Temporary Lockdown, which is a card I thought about. It's cheap. It's only 3 mana, and it doesn't really hit me per se. The only cards that it might hit would be my Chalice the Void, maybe, and my Snapcaster, possibly, if I had those on board. So I think that might help. Chalice the Void's been pretty decent. It can be played around, and it's not like a win all against those particular decks. Against like those those affinity decks. Sometimes I'll play Chalice, call it 1, and they still be able to play the game. It doesn't really matter too much. Or I call 0, hit like the Mem Knight or something like that. Either way, Chalice is not like a for sure answer. So I need an efficient way to kind of clear the entire board. Like Farewell's great, but Farewell is 6 mana. Don't think Farewell I would be able to survive until I'd be able to cast Farewell. So yeah, Farewell's a little too late. It's probably the best removal. It only loses the counter spells like Spell Pierce if they're playing that, or they're playing the artifact counter. But yeah, I think Temporary Lockdown might be a good solution because they don't really have any ways of dealing with enchantment. So they can't really remove enchantment. They can't play Leyline Binding. And if they are playing like Prismatic Ending or something like that, they can't even hit the Temporary Lockdown. So that's something I thought about. I also thought about Dress Down, but Dress Down only answers the constructs. It doesn't really answer the rest of their board. It doesn't answer the Urza, doesn't answer the Mem Knights, and the 10 other creatures they have on the board. Granted, I want to say constructs were the hardest things to deal with. Both those games against Asmodean Food and against Affinity, the construct tokens were relatively hard to deal with. just because they made so many of them. The nice thing about Dress Down is it is an instant speed. You can flash it in, which is nice. But I think the temporary lockdown might be better for 3 mana because you can clear the tokens. You can clear basically 2 CMC and lower, which is a majority of their deck. It might not hit like Urza or something like that, but I should be able to hit like all of that against like the Azmodan food deck. I'd be able to hit Azmodan. I'd be able to hit all their food tokens, their cat, their oven, basically just the entire entourage of stuff if I had temporary lockdown. So I did buy a couple of temporary lockdowns to maybe cyborg in to try out. But yeah, that was basically my RCQ experience, kind of like my first big tournament, and um, yeah, it was a good learning experience. And definitely I need to practice against other type of decks. But outside of that, moving on to Monday, which was I think today's Wednesday or something like that. But um, Monday, 2 days ago, went to Modern, did pretty well. Went undefeated. So, like I said, I get a lot of practice against top tier Modern style decks, but I don't get too much practice against the lower stuff. So I do poorly against the lower stuff, and I would consider those my bad matchups anyways. But yeah, so played 4 rounds, 4 rounds of Modern. Um, I played against round one Murktide, round two Red Prison, round three Living End, round four Yawgmoth. So pretty much had a good spread of like tier one, tier two decks there. Um, Against Murktide, it was pretty close. He got me game one, and I ended up winning game two and three. We almost went into time during game three, but I won because I had like a Celestial Colonnade and attack and stuff. The one cool maneuver I did was I had he had a Magnus of the Moon on the board. I had a Solitude and a 3/3 Samurai. I attacked with both. The card I drew for the turn was Celestial Colonnade. We were basically both out of cards in our hands. But so yeah, I swung with both. He decides to block the Magnus with against my Solitude, killing off the Magnus. I dealt 3 damage, and then I play the Celestial Colonnade tapped. So that's when I guess just holding it up, just attacking first, kind of made sure I wanted to force my opponent to block. So if I played the Celestial Colonnade first before attacking or something, he may not have blocked. Because he doesn't obviously want to give me untapped mana with the Celestial Colonnade, because that would kill him. But he had blocking. He draws a card, passes back to me. I animate the Colonnade, swing with both. He was at 4 health, I believe. So in a misplay I think he did was he tried to Archmage Charm my Celestial Colonnade. He had a Japanese Archmage Charm. Nothing wrong with using foreign cards, but I almost accepted the game state of him taking my Colonnade, but then I remembered I don't think Celestial or Archmage Charm allows you to take lands, because that'd be fucking kind of bonkers. So I pulled the Archmage Charm from my graveyard and read it, and I showed him, yeah, this you can't target my Colonnade with the Celestial or with the Archmage Charm, because it says non-land targets for the third effect. Let me see if I can find one right here. It's somewhere here. Yeah. So the third effect down there might be a bit of glare, but yeah, non-land targets. So he accepted that game state, and I went from there. For the matchup, what I sided in was I definitely sided the Chalices. The Aether Gusses were handy. Don't know if I put in the videos or not, but I think this was basically it here. So I am going to be cutting out Kaya's Guile, or at least one or two copies of it from my sideboard, so I can play some other stuff, like temporary lockdown or something like that. But I took out like a dam, and I took out Ops. I took out a Snapcaster, and a couple other slow cards. Um, put this in. Chalice is pretty, self-explanatory. You basically just nuke their one drops. They really don't have any way of getting rid of it, unless they're playing like a Brazen Borrower or something. There's almost no way of getting rid of Chalice. Uh, Aether Gust hits a majority of their threats. The only thing it won't hit, is like Counterspell. It won't hit, Archmage or something like that. But I wanted to keep it in against like a deck that can potentially play Blood Moon. So knowing that Murktide can play Blood Moon, I almost always put this in to hit Blood Moon, Ragavan, Darcy, Expressive Alliteration. Those are the main cards I aim for with Aether Gust, and really works kind of well against them. Teferi for Teferi, they are a counterspell deck. You just want to turn off their counterspell, play like another Teferi in there. Hopefully, if you can resolve it and they can't remove it with like Unholy Heat or something, you're golden. You almost always want to plus Teferi up when playing against Murktide. Hopefully they don't have, like, if they have to spend 2 bolts to kill Teferi, then that's fine. Hopefully they don't have Delirium, because if they have Delirium, obviously they just one-shot your Teferi with Unholy Heat there. But yeah, and then the rest is just Graveyard Hate and uncounterable board wipe, because they do run counter spells, and that's basically my sideboard against them, and it worked out well for me for game 2 and 3, and basically one from there. In general, blue white has pretty good matchup against Murktide, just because we have a ton of efficient removal, a ton of like counter spells, and stuff like that. So if the game drags out too long, blue white generally has a better a higher win percentage rate against Murktide. So not an amazing win or anything to brag about, but a win for me there. Game 2, play against MonoRed Prison. Basically, they're a control deck that doesn't play counterspell, so other than Chalice the Voids and stuff like that, Snaring Bridges, a bunch of Planeswalkers, Blood Moons, Magnus of the Moon, Ragavan. So they play all the best red cards they can of the format. And so game 1, I think I go second, but I was just able to kind of set up or delay his strategy. Like, he tries to cast what did he try to cast? He tries to cast I think Blood Moon or a Planeswalker. I had a bunch of counters. Basically I just kind of won through that. My control is better than his control, and so I think once I resolved a 5-mana Teferi, I kind of won from there. He did try to resolve a Fury a few times or a Chandra here and there, but I just had the counter spells for it, so won there. As for the side, game 2, I think I just went something like this. Something like this, yeah. So, Subtlety for the free, like, bouncing, like, in case they had, like, a Magnus of the Moon or a Planeswalker, and Subtlety's good. Same thing with Dolan's Veto, the Veto, maybe a Planeswalker or Blood Moon. Aether Gust definitely get rid of any card I want. Aether Gust is the best card in the matchup. It's like acts as removal, acts as a counter spell. So, and then Teferi just bounces artifacts and stuff like that, because he was playing Chalice and he was playing Ensnaring Bridges and stuff like that. But yeah, good matchup for me. 2-0 there. Murktide I went 2-1. Red Prison I went 2-0. Not super difficult matchup for me there. Game 3 I play against my friend who's playing Living End. And we practice against each other quite a bit, so I have an idea of how his deck works. Game 1 was pretty close. I tapped out when I shouldn't have, and he Living End me. Put up a good fight game 1. I ended up just giving him game 1, but game 2 and 3 definitely in my favor, just because I had so much ways to kind of play around him. So what I did was I did something like this, I think. Basically, I put in 12 cards of my sideboard into my deck and took out 12 of the crappiest card in my deck. Um, and it's okay to overside like this, because I just my side deck can definitely change, but I purposely oversided because I knew this matchup, because we played against each other so much. Living End for me, um, you know, it's been an easier matchup, I guess, just because I understand how the deck works. So cards I took out were like, I think I took out like just ops, and just took out some snaps, because I didn't care to really spend a mana to cast stuff like that. I'd rather have like a bunch of threats held up instead. So I think I took out ops. I took out all the prismatic endings. I took out all marches. I took out some of the slower planeswalkers. And yeah, I just ran a full 12 board hate against him, and it worked out fine for me. Game 3 was pretty funny. Game 3, I kept a 1 land hand, and I will show you my hand. So I had something like this, I think. So I had a 1 land hand, but I'll explain my reasoning as to why I kept it too. And maybe that can kind of help you guys decipher how to play, or let me see here. What else do I put? That's 7 cards. I'm missing 1 card here, I think. Something like this. So, okay, yeah. So, this was my, this was game 3. This was my opening hand. So I kept it. So you might ask yourself, why would you keep a 1 land hand? Granted, I had some early plays, but my reasoning was, I knew he was gonna try to grief. I knew he was gonna try to get early stuff in the graveyard. And I think I ended up drawing. I don't know what I drew for my 8th card, because he went first. So me going first, I went Mystic Gate. I think it's either Mystic Gate or Sunken Ruins. One of the lands that doesn't even give me any colors, so I didn't give a crap at that point. I was like, Mystic Gate into Spell Bomb. He forces and negates it. Okay, fair. I played Chalice on 0 and pass. So now look at my hand. If he was able to get rid of the Chalice, which was fine, and, I was planning on just invoking my entire hand, if that was if it came down to that. So if he went turn 3 and started to try to like dump stuff in the graveyard, and then try to Living End, if he somehow got rid of my Chalice, that's fine. I would have invoked Subtlety here, or Solitude here, and invoke Subtlety. At least get these 2 in my graveyard, because they'd come back from the Living End, and I'd be able to basically return 2 of his creatures, and he'd be down 2, and I would have at least something. I think another card I think I drew another blue card. I think it was like an Archmage's Charm or something for my 8th card. So I could have just gotten all 3 of these into my graveyard if he did try cast Living End. So he would cascade, cast Living End. I would respond to that, just dump all this into my graveyard. These would sacrifice themselves, end up in my graveyard. His Living End would bring all 3 of them back. I would have been in a fine position. I would have been able to return 2, or at least return or kill something, and at least have 2, like 2 through 3. So that should be about as big as his board. So, but yeah, so that was the plan. But fortunately for me, I ended up drawing like lands per turn, so I ended up just kind of playing like a sort of a regular game. He eventually did get rid of my Chalice the Void. I think I had another Chalice, but I was just like screwing around. I played a Chalice into Chalice. So I was like, you know what, a Chalice, and he reminded me, he's like, yeah, Chalice counters Chalice. Like, oh yeah, forget whatever, so I killed my own Chalice there. But we were kind of screwing around, so but yeah, that was my hand. I ended up drawing lands per turn, and ended up just playing a regular game. I resolved a Teferi, resolved some other stuff, and I think he just couldn't come back from there. Yeah, but yeah, I think I got a lot of practice against Living End, so I at least am somewhat confident against that matchup. So um, just the sheer amount of practice we have against each other. For him, like his hardest matchup is against me too. Everyone else at the locals, he's done pretty well against, and I guess he's won all his matchups except against me. So I think in all fairness, I put in a lot of graveyard hate, and that's just something that's tough for him to deal with. Where like he gets rid of one thing, I had like two more things for him to deal with. Where most decks, they don't overload on graveyard hate, or overload on hate cards as much. But my deck, I knew I just could, so I did it, and that kind of just went well for me there. So that was game three. So I went 2-1 against Living End. And then game four, I know I was up against Yawgmoth, and we played against each other a few times, but we decided just to split the winnings for the night, and we didn't play each other, so we just took the pot and split it, and then that was it. But against Yawgmoth, I generally have a pretty decent matchup against them. And just because I have a lot of like low efficient removal, and my sideboard's relatively good against them. Hardest card I have to deal with is probably Grist. As long as they don't resolve a Grist or get Grist out on the board, I can usually just deal with their board, and they can't really deal with my board. But if they get Grist out and start pumping out a bunch of 1/1 tokens and stuff like that, it gets a little bit harder to deal with. But in the end, usually Yawgmoth is never able to combo off on me. The way I die to Yawgmoth, if I do, is I die to their potential like 3-4 endurances or something. Last week I did lose to him because he got a Torok out, and I just couldn't get rid of Torok for the life of me during the last time we played against each other. And yeah, so last time we played against each other, he got Torok out, and I just didn't have any non-white removal for him, unfortunately. So this week, if we did play against each other, I would probably put in like keep Makai's Guile in there, put more board wipes and stuff like that, and so I would be more prepared to fight against Torok. But yeah, last week Torok just tore me apart. Just all my removal was white when I had it in my hand. So yeah, that was my experience. Locals did well, at least for what it was. Now let's talk about some changes I want to make to the deck. Let's go to the side deck first. My side deck right now is kind of like in the state of like almost completed, but I could make a couple of changes here and there. So changes I'd probably make is I'd probably definitely last time I had Esper, the Esper of Void Ren in here, but I took it out. Didn't really care for Void Ren too much. It only really helps against something like a Wilderness Wreck, but for 3 mana, it wasn't that great. So I cut it out. This week, I'm thinking of trying to fit in maybe 1 or 2 temporary lockdowns. And so I'm definitely thinking of cutting out 1 Kai's Guile and maybe a Spell Bomb, but I'm not too sure. I've liked Spell Bombs against graveyard matchups. They've been really good. They've drawn me cards and annihilated my opponent's graveyard more than I can ask for. So they've been pretty good. I don't think I would cut out Teferi. I like the 4th copy of Teferi in the sideboard. I think 3 main deck is fine. 4 main deck is too much. 3 is good. But in certain matchups, I do want 4 copies, and that's why I keep it in here. The Wind Beetles has been great. I always love it against Cascade decks, especially if they try Cascade during my turn. If they have a force of negation up, or they have like a Flusterstorm or some shit like that, at least Video will be able to counter the Rhino, or counter Glimpse, or counter whatever. Good enough there. Chalice is great at 2. I never felt like I needed a 3rd copy of Chalice. I've either seen it when I needed to, or I just never saw it and just never cared. For the other cards, Salties I've liked. Great against certain matchups. I could potentially cut 1 Salty. Verdicts maybe maybe I can cut a Verdict and play 2 temporary lockdowns instead. But I've like Verdict against certain matchups where if I know they're running counter spells and I know they're trying to go wide or something, against Affinity and stuff like that, Verdict's probably the best I can do. I still like Damn, just because I can Damn certain things for 1 mana, and sometimes I go wide, quite wide, because I'm playing Emperor, and against like Mono Red and like a couple other decks. Once I slap down Emperor, I go really wide with her, and she's helped me win games. And some people like her, some people don't. It's just kind of a personal preference. I've always liked Emperor, even in like Pioneer or here in Modern. I like being able to flash her out as a threat on their turn and having them try to deal with it or something like that. Sorry, I'm gonna take a gulp of water there. But yeah, Emperor has just been one of those cards that's done well for me. Sometimes she can be bad, but most of the time she's done, act as removal, act as a threat where I make like 2 Samurai tokens, start blocking or start swinging in, or I buff up my Solitude or buff up my Snapcasters with the Emperor, give them first strike, block with them. Like she's giving me those ability to play tricky plays. So I've liked playing the Emperor, and that's why I like playing Damned, because sometimes I don't want to board wipe myself, because I may have a bunch of Snapcasters out, I may have a bunch of you know Emperor Samurai tokens out, or Spirit tokens from Kaya Guile, and so sometimes with like Damn I just want to like kill one thing, and for the most part it usually is that. Like I usually just play it for 2 mana, shoot down like a Yawgmoth, or shoot down a Murktide or Ragavan, or maybe like a Darcy or a Death Shadow or something like that. Like I just want to kill one thing, and so that's why I prefer Damn over Verdict in my deck, at least in my main board. But it's also nice to have Verdict in the main board or in the sideboard, knowing that you can side in when you need to, when you need more board wipes, and it works better with Snapcaster because Damn cannot be overloaded with Snapcaster since it's an alternative cost. Where Verdict, I can snap Verdict or Snapcaster and then Verdict immediately for 6 mana and board wipe if I really needed to. That doesn't really come up that often, but there's scenarios where it might, and so yeah. And yeah, so that's why I still like the Verdict. It's hard to say what I want to cut out to add in the the secondary copy of temporary lockdown. Maybe I can cut both Kayas, but I definitely like 3. Like three always felt good. At least 2 copies, maybe 3. Like it's always felt good, especially with Snapcaster. Like turn 5 snap. Kai's Guile is generally pretty good against most matchups, especially if they committed so much mana to one threat or something like that, or to a move they do. Kaya's been pretty good for that. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think I should cut out, or what other cards I could try instead of temporary lockdown. In my head, I think temporary lockdown is the best of the cards I mentioned earlier. So I mentioned Dress Down, Fracturing Gust, Farewell, Cleansing Nova, did I mention Dress Down? Yeah, I think I already mentioned Dress Down. Or like more Verdicts, maybe, Temporary Lockdown, Explosive Engineering. Yeah, so those are some cards I thought about putting in. Now, the only issue with those cards, some of the cards like Engineering Explosive, even Temporary Lockdowns, I can't Snapcaster it, obviously. Like, I like cards where I can Snapcaster. Obviously, these aren't that, they're not great Snapcaster targets either, but they will work. I used to play Engineering Explosive, but, killing 2 tokens or construct tokens for 2 mana doesn't seem too good to me. And sometimes it's a little too expensive to play. If you're playing ED on 1, and then like you have to finagle yourself to have open mana so you can blow up their board. And that still doesn't answer some stuff. Like you either answer like the 0 mana stuff, or you answer the 1 mana stuff, or you leave their 2 mana stuff up, because they do play a bunch of 2 mana stuff also. So it's like You know, where temporary lockdown, it's like I play 3 mana, I just board wipe them and just pray they can't do anything, and pray they can't remove my temporary lockdown. Like hopefully I have a counter spell or something to protect the temporary lockdown so it doesn't get removed, and just cleans house for 3 mana straight. So only problem with that is obviously it doesn't work against, you know, if they have flash or if they have open mana make a construct. But I guess at that point, if I did temporary lockdown, I guess the construct is a 1/1. If they had Urza Saga and they tapped mana for Urza Saga and made a 1/1 token, I guess I'd be fine with that. Not the biggest deal, I guess. So that's a couple cards I'm thinking of. Obviously, temporary lockdown does lose to something like if they play a Teferi maybe. Or they play like Leyline Binding, I guess. But yeah, those be the cards I would think I would have to deal with if I did play Leyline Binding. But I'll at least try out one copy for now, and then go from there. Now, main deck wise, I've been kind of mulling over this idea, and you know, I've talked to some people, and I can make this deck into a 5-color deck. What I mean by that is by adding another Trinome into the deck, I can essentially give myself what's Leyline's Binding's key term, domain? Is it domain? Correct me if I'm wrong. Let me look it up real quick so I don't give out misinformation here. Yes, it is domain. So because I already have 4 colors in the deck, I have obviously I can easily usually get 3, maybe even 4 colors by turn 2. So I usually have this plus the Raffine's Tower here. So if I had 2 fetch lands, I could essentially give myself four colors, or at least, you know, 4 different land types. I guess you got plains, island, swamp, mountain. So I can at least give myself four land types. Typically, I usually have something like a Hollow Fountains or a Mystic Gate, and this would technically give me 4 colors for Prismatic Ending. So that's usually how I play it, you know, and that's been working well for me, at least with Prismatic Ending. I have Prismatic Ending for CMC multiple times, and so I don't think I would ever go to just 3 colors. I call my deck an Esper deck because, namely, it is, you know, black splashed in. I don't play any red cards, but I do have this for the Prismatic Ending. So primarily, I'm an Esper deck, but you can say I'm a 4-color deck because of, you know, the Steam event. Now, like I mentioned earlier in my video, I had issues dealing with Leyline Binding. There's not many cards in my deck that can remove Leyline Binding if my opponent is playing it. If they Leyline Binding my Teferi, or Leyline Binding my Solitude or something like that, it's basically gone forever. There's no way for me to effectively remove it. Looking through my deck, I can March, which is unlikely to happen. I can't, you know, Leyline Binding is a 6-mana card on the board, 6 CMC, so marching for 7 is impossible. I can return it with Teferi Hero Dominaria. I can tuck it, or I can bounce it to hand with Time Raveler, and that's basically it. Other than that, I have to counter it. If they play it, I just have to counter it and pray I have a counter spell up. So, because of the popularity of Leyline Binding, and the fact that, you know, I probably will have to combat it myself eventually, you know, more so now than later. Like if the Rhino decks are playing it, 4-color Omnath is playing it, I'm probably gonna have to adapt to it and play against it also. So, with my understanding of that, I'm thinking about playing Binding myself. Now, right now, if you look at my mana base, it's pretty standard right now. I haven't changed my mana base in like almost like 6 months. It's working pretty well. Occasionally, sometimes I'll get color screwed. Like, oh, the RCQ. This happened one time. The RCQ where I was playing against Affinity, I drew 4 lands that gave me only blue. I think I drew like 2 islands, a steam vent, and a Hall of Storm Giant, and I couldn't play the game. I had a really good hand. I had like, Prismatic Ending, Saga, just like, all the good removal against them, but I drew 4 lands that did not give me color. I think that's one of the very few times where I got color screwed. Getting mana screwed happens. Mana screwed means you're just stuck on like 2 lands, 3 lands. That I can sometimes survive. I can kind of outplay him, surprisingly. And it does suck getting mana screwed, but getting color screwed is just as bad. Like that rarely happens. Like getting color screwed where you just don't have a mana of a certain color and you just can't play your hand. That rarely happens, but it does happen, and that was like my primary like experience where I had that happen, where I just didn't get any source of white or in any source other than just blue and red, which is really weird, considering my mana base. So my mana base hasn't changed in quite a long time, and it's felt pretty good. I've been able to beat Blood Moons, just like on Monday when I played against 2 decks that played Blood Moon. I played against Murktide that had Blood Moon, and I played against MonoRed Prison, which played both Magnus and Blood Moon. So I was able to beat both of them. Happy with my mana base. 5 basics is kind of greedy, but it has worked for me, and yeah, I've been liking it so far. In terms of the cards that come in tap, Rafine's Tower, Celestial Colonnade, and maybe a Hall of Storm Giant. And so those are the cards that would generally come in tap, that are slow. So my thought process is here. The changes I may make to the deck, thinking about it, is this here. So these are the cards I may take out for Lady Binding. Let me also take out this card here. So how I'm thinking of building my new mana base to support Leyline Binding. Because Leyline Binding, you can Leyline Binding a Leyline Binding, which is my answer to Leyline Binding, I guess, would be the cheapest way. I thought about playing like Esper Charm and stuff, but 3 mana to kill a Leyline Binding doesn't seem too great. And so my thought process is, I think March has been sort of power crept. It served me well for a long time. The only thing I wish March could do is remove Planeswalkers. That's my kind of like biggest like hate thing about March. I don't mind paying extra mana for March, or exiling a white card to pay for March, but just lately, if I'm playing against Planeswalkers, I just can't remove them, and I think playing Leyline Binding might help with that. So cards I'm thinking of putting in, I may take out 1 Plains and play the Bant Trinome, which I think is called Spara's Headquarters. So it's green, white, and blue, which is the colors I would need anyways. So green, white, blue will allow me to do that. I think I'm gonna keep Steam Vents in as the the 4th thing, which is fine. So why do I want green, white, blue? I guess I could also do the Ragoon's Trinome, Ragrin's Trinome, and I would replace this with a Breeding Pool instead if I did that. But I'm thinking I'm gonna keep it Steam Vents, whatever. It doesn't matter. So if I choose the Ragoon Trinomes, then I would need a Breeding Pool. If I go with Spara's Headquarters here, then I would keep Steam Vents, and I think that's what I'm gonna do. So, because I always want to fetch, if I'm going first or second and I play a fetch lands, I'm gonna either want to fetch for the Esper Trinome or the Spara's Headquarters, depending. Most likely, it's always gonna be Esper Trinome, because I want those mana up, and then I can either fetch Steam Vents and then make my Leyline Binding cost 2, which is fine. It's still a good rate. 2 mana for removal is still a good rate. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, obviously, if I get out Spartas and I get out the Esper Trinome here, So just pretend this plains is a Sparta. That would make the ley line binding cost 1, which is great. It's perfect. That's what you want. That's the ideal scenario. Or you have like yeah. So I think this is right here is the ideal scenario. I always want my dual lands to give me blue and white. I think black's not as much because black is fetchable for me, so I don't really care about fetching for black as much. So on the positive side, I can make my prismatic ending pay for 5 now, which is nice. So that allows me to kill like Teferis, like big mana Teferi, allows me to kill Solitude, allows me to kill Fury, stuff like that. 5 mana, which is very rare. Like it doesn't really come up that often that you're paying 5 mana to kill something. But yeah, that is an option there. And binding is cheaper to play than March, and it hits basically everything March couldn't hit. The only issue is it doesn't hit lands. So if your opponent's playing a man land, you cannot shoot the man land anymore. Now you have to like figure out how to deal with the man land, which I guess I could play. If I had to deal with it, I'd probably have to like have Teferi Flash in Dam or something like that, or Solitude, or Kaiskaya, or the Emperor at that point to deal with the man lands. So I can't shoot man land for 1 mana anymore. So that's the con of that. But the pros is I can prismatic ending for 5. Another con is Leyline Binding cannot be Snapcaster back, which is why I would cut the Snap to 3. If I played Binding, I would cut Snap to 3, because ideally I wanted to hit Urza Saga with the March and then snap it back, hit something else, but that hasn't come up that often. It's kind of a niche thing, so because of that, it's so niche that it might not come up. This play might not be that useful, so I would replace these 3 with 3 Leyline Bindings, and this with Spartan Headquarters, or Spara's Headquarters. So that's the idea. The one thing it does make me more weak to is Blood Moon, though. Leyline Binding is not an answer for Blood Moon. Turns all your lands to a swamp. So unless I had, or sorry, turns all my lands into a mountain. So unless I had a basic plus an island, so that would give me 3 land types, which would make Leyline 3 mana. Then you can get rid of Blood Moon that way, which I guess is the typical rate with March anyways. So typically I would just March for 3 or 4 if I was playing against Blood Moon, which I guess it sounds about right? But let's say I had only on plains on the board. You can't just because typically what I like to do is like I would like to float a white mana and let them resolve Blood Moon and then shoot the Blood Moon with like prismatic ending if I had it on flash speed off of Teferi or March. But because of Blood Moon, you can't just float a mana and then shoot it for 1 mana, because once Blood Moon hits the board, it changes your lands to all mountains except for the basics, which means it would make Leyline Binding cost more than what it usually would. So usually it would cost 1 mana, assuming you have 2 tri lands. So let's say I had 2 tri lands, right? So let's pretend this is a tri land, and I had another island or a plains, like another plains. Let me just grab another plains then. So wherever the hell it is here. Sorry, the deck's in a mess somewhere. Okay, here you go. Alright, so let's say I had another plains, and this was a Spartan Headquarters or some shit, and they cast Blood Moon. You tap for 1 mana. This typically means Leyline would usually cost 1 mana, right? Once Blood Moon resolves, though, these become mountains, and so now you only have 2 for domain, which means your Leyline now costs 4 mana rather than the usual rate of 1. So I can't even. You wouldn't be with 3 mana. Like With 3 lands like this, you would not be able to get rid of the Blood Moon or the Magnus, because you don't have a 4th mana. So I guess you could still like wait a turn, untap this, wait a turn, play another land and then shoot it for 4. But yeah, that's the one con, is that it makes my deck a lot weaker to Blood Moon if I'm only playing 4 basics. It'd be 3 island plus 1 plains. Um, I don't think I would. I don't think I would get rid of an island. I definitely would probably get rid of a plains, because the islands I need blue mana for sure. Always. Um, Plains, and I guess it makes my deck a little more weirder when I'm fetching for lands. Like I have to kind of like be careful what I fetch for. If I'm playing against a matchup that isn't playing Blood Moon, which is fine, but if like I draw 2 tap lands and I draw like this, it's gonna be weird, right? So the mana base is gonna, if I do add in the headquarters plus the ley line, it is gonna change my deck up a little bit. It's gonna be a little bit weirder, but I think it might be okay. That's something I'm gonna have to test out and let you guys know. So I might head up to a store or something, see if I can find a deal for the land and the 3 binding. I don't want to play 4 copies. I think 4 copies is a little too much. I still like Prismatic Ending over binding, mainly because I can play ending whenever I want to. I can play it on turn 1, where like ley lines I can't play it on turn 1. I have to wait until at least turn 2 to play um, binding. So turn 1 I can still like kill Ragavan. I can still kill like a 1 mana, whatever. So I think I still keep Prismatic at 4. So I change out 1 land and add in, take out these 3, add in 4 bindings just to combat other bindings. And I mean, overall it's a good removal card. I just don't like it because it forces my mana base to be greedier, and I think my mana base is already kind of greedy in some sense. But I think with that change, that's what I'm looking to probably do. So I'll let you guys know how that turns out in the next week or so, if I can get those cards. I'm hoping binding does fall down a little bit in price, but they're about like $20 right now. It's not the worst, but I don't want to really feel like paying $20 for it. But either case, those are some of my thoughts, some of the reports, and some of the updates that I might be doing in my deck pretty soon. So let me know what you guys think, and hopefully, some stuff I mentioned might help you guys in your deck building process, or playing. Let me know down below. If not, you guys have a good one, and see you next time.